Thank the Majority Leader for locking us in, and I think we will complete our comments well in time for the vote. I'm very pleased to be joined by my colleague, Senator Collins, as we introduce a bill that we call the Religious Workforce Protection Act. Our third co-sponsor, Senator Risch, is chairing a Foreign Relations Committee hearing right now, but wanted me to comment that he is also a co-sponsor of the bill. This bill deals with a problem that I first saw in my parish, that at the time, when I was talking to folks in my church about it, seemed like a small local problem, but it turns out it's a big national problem. My church, St. Elizabeth's of Hungary in Richmond, Virginia, is founded as an immigrant church. It was heavily for Italian and German-American Catholics right after World War I, who felt sort of looked askance upon because of the war, and they wanted to have their own parish that would be a haven for them. Now, 100+ years later, my church is still an immigrant church, but it's about a third Congolese. But in addition to the fact that many of our churches of all denominations, synagogues and temples and gurdwaras and mosques in the country serve new American populations, it's also the case that many of our religious workers in the United States are also immigrants. 2 of the last 3 priests in my parish were immigrants, one from India and one from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and I began to hear about a problem with the way our immigration laws work for religious workers. There is a visa called an R1 visa that allows, upon the petitioning of a church or a mosque or a synagogue, for a religious worker to come and work for a congregation for a period of 5 years. The R1 visa lasts for 5 years. Often during the course of that 5 years, the faith congregation decides, here's somebody who's really great, we'd like to keep him or her, and they apply for an EB-4 visa, which is a more extended visa. And the idea would be you would apply, and the application process would finish before your R1 visa expires. Well, it turns out we have huge backlogs in processing these EB-4 visas. And so many religious workers get to the end of their 5-year term, their EB-4 is pending, likely to be approved, but not yet approved, and they have to depart the country. And they're required to go back home and stay for at least a year before they come back. There can also be some challenges for religious workers if, say, one starts working at St. Elizabeth's Parish and gets moved to St. Paul's Parish just a mile or 2 away. They sort of have to restart the process because it's a new employer, even though they're essentially doing the same thing. So Senator Collins and I, and she'll describe her own story that she sees in her native Maine with the same topic. We started to talk about this, and it turns out this is an issue in Catholic parishes, but it is an issue much more broadly. And so what we've done is introduced a bill we call the Religious Workforce Protection Act. It would allow someone in this R1 category to file the application for the EB-4, and if the 5-year R1 period ends before the EB-4 has been granted, this bill would give discretion, not a mandate, but discretion to the Secretary of Homeland Security to grant an extension of the R1 visa for a worker who's applied for the EB-4 and who fully qualifies, has no disqualifying factor that would suggest that they would not be eligible for the EB-4. It also allows a little more flexibility so that a religious worker can move from one parish to the next or get a promotion from associate pastor to pastor without restarting the application process, as long as they maintain continuous work as a religious worker, as the R1 program was designed for. We think this is going to be a good fix for many of our religious communities, and I'm happy to say, before I yield the floor to Senator Collins, that the support we have gained from religious communities nationally is pretty notable. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, the National Association of Evangelicals, the U.S. Council of Muslim Organizations, the Hindu American Foundation, the Immigration Committee of Agudat Israel of America, and the Episcopal Church of America have all weighed in because so many different faith congregations are seeing this same challenge, the backlog in processing applications for R1 religious workers to be able to convert their status to EB-4. We think it's a basic commonsensical provision, and giving the DHS secretary on a case-by-case basis the ability to review and then extend someone's R1 status while their EB-4 is processing. Seems like a way to solve this problem for so many faith congregations all around the United States. And with that, I'm very, very pleased to be joined in this by my colleague from Maine, and I would like to yield to Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Maine.
Mr. President, I am pleased to join today with my friend and colleague from Virginia, Senator Kaine, to introduce the Religious Workforce Protection Act. Our bill would allow foreign-born religious workers in the United States to continue to perform essential work in their communities all across the nation, including the state of Maine. I would also like to thank our friend and colleague, Senator Jim Risch, who joins us in introducing this important bill. Mr. President, like my colleague from Virginia, I too learned about this problem from my local parish in Maine. In the summertime, I tend to attend Catholic Mass in either Lincoln or Howland, Maine. Both parishes are served by the same priest. The priest, until last year, came from India, Father Tony. We all loved him. Unfortunately, when he went back home, there was a change in his visa status and he was unable to return. Our legislation would grant the Secretary of Homeland Security the authority to extend the temporary R1 status for a religious worker past 5 years until he or she receives a decision on the permanent EB-4 visa application. In doing so, the bill would provide a solution to the significant problems that religious organizations and workers are experiencing with our current system. Our bill would help religious workers of all faith traditions continue their work of providing services such as acting as a chaplain at a hospital, conducting worship services, and serving as religious educators. Mr. President, the issue religious employees have faced with our visa system have evolved over time, but the result is the same. Religious organizations are harmed, communities are hurt, and religious workers are unable to pursue their missions. In 2021, the severe backlog in the processing of religious workers' visa petitions was worsened by the COVID pandemic. It forced many religious employees who were already in the United States to leave the communities that they were serving so well and for which they were so essential, or cease working altogether, such as a Catholic priest being unable to perform Mass for fear of violating immigration law. There were also additional workers outside of the United States awaiting entry, unable to serve in our religious communities. Although the backlog did decrease as embassies and consulates reopened post-COVID, other issues have arisen. Due to a change in the statutory interpretation made by the State Department in 2023, many religious workers who are in the United States on temporary R1 visas are unable to receive decisions on permanent EB-4 visa applications within the maximum 5-year duration of an R1 visa. In other words, their R1 visa expires before they get a decision on their EB-4 permanent visa. The result is that they have to leave our country and the communities, parishes, mosques, synagogues that they are and churches that they are serving for at least 1 year before they can return. In Maine, local communities have experienced this problem firsthand and would be greatly helped by our legislation. Of the 50 Catholic parishes in Maine, 35, more than half, benefit from the ministry of international priests. Recently, 3 Catholic priests in rural Maine communities, St. Agathe, Bucksport, and Greenville, were left without any priests at all for months. These priests were unable to work because their R1 visas expired before their EB-4 applications could be fully processed. If this issue is not addressed, religious organizations in Maine and across the nation will continue to lose pastors, priests, rabbis, and other religious workers who lead and support their congregations and communities. As I explained, this bill solves the problem by granting the Secretary of Homeland Security the authority simply to extend the temporary R1 status past the 5 years until the religious worker receives a decision on the permanent EB-4 visa application. This just makes sense. Senator Kaine and I have pressed the Department of State and Homeland Security to do everything that they can to administratively address this problem. When I first learned of the issue in 2021, Senator Kaine and I wrote to the Secretaries of State and Homeland Security to express our concern about the long backlogs in processing religious worker visa petitions. In 2023 and 2024, we again wrote to the 2 secretaries about the change in interpretation that had the effect of worsening the problem by further lengthening the time it takes for applicants from most countries to receive their employment-based visas. Though some progress has been made as a result of our efforts, a true and lasting fix requires an act of Congress. Mr. President, I want to be clear that our bill is carefully tailored. It is extremely narrow. It does not change any requirement or bars to obtaining an employment-based visa. It does not allow entry for any person who is not already permitted under the law to enter the United States. Religious workers would continue to face the same vetting and other requirements that are applicable to other non-citizens who are seeking to work in our country. Mr. President, let me also emphasize that there's no doubt that our country has faced an illegal immigration crisis, but that is not what we are talking about here. We are talking about people who have lawfully entered the United States under a religious worker visa and we simply provide a tailored, carefully crafted solution for those who are lawfully present in our country and serving our churches, our parishes, our synagogues, our religious organizations. They are of many different faiths, and they have developed important ties to their communities. As we have highlighted in a letter that we sent to the Secretaries of State and Homeland Security, these employees provide basic necessities to those in need. They care for and minister to the sick and dying in hospitals. They work with adolescents and young adults to help them. They counsel those who have suffered severe trauma and hardship. They serve as educators and mentors, and they are critical as faith leaders. Surely this is one area where we should be able to come together as Republicans and Democrats and do something worthwhile, something that will have a real-world impact in communities across this country. The broad support for this effort is shown by the many organizations of different faiths who have endorsed our legislation. I urge my colleagues to support our efforts so that we can allow much-needed religious workers to continue their ministry and their service in communities all across America. Thank you, Mr. President.